won't you buy me a night on the town? Counting on you, Lord. Please don't let me down. Just prove that you love me by the next round. So, Lord, won't you buy me a night on the town? Sorry, guys, I have to fucking fuck my stream. And so I'm singing. The song I sing, song singing makes me happy. I wish that were true. I wish everyone were happy. I love that. I love Paul Berry Boo. Love me some Paul Berry Boo. He's just a little. He has cute little songs. He just has cute little songs, and I love that. Love that. Now let me add everyone. Add everyone. More Latour. We are so back. I'm probably gonna cut this one up into 2 videos. I think I'm gonna go for extra long this time. I think that's what I'm deciding. I'm not sure yet though, but it's probably what I'll do. That is probably what I shall do. Let's just close all that. I've been I talked about it yesterday on my gaming stream, but I've been watching 91 Days, and I'm on the 10th episode now, and there's only 12, so I've got an hour left. Remembering why I thought it was so good. Why it's just a good anime. It's a good short anime. I like it. I really like it. Anyone should watch. Everyone should watch it. It's one of those. It's just really good. It's really good. What colors did I use? Clarifications. Just something that I want to. Okay, purple is just things I want to do. Okay. Well, let's get started. We have quite a bit we're going to go over today. What I've decided, I think we're going to go back to the contents page so I can explain what we're going to do. We're going to finish chapter 3, and then I think we are going to start chapter 4. I think that's what we're going to do, and I think for this, because we're going to go over into a new chapter, a completely new one, when after this, I'm going to release the section that I covered as part of the 4th chapter as a new video. I think that's what I will do, and that's what I'm deciding. I have to go in and I have to edit stuff for the one where I was playing Risk of Rain, but I think I'm gonna start doing streams like that, so whenever I have work, I can just give you guys stuff, and it's easy. So let's go back to 116. And right now, we are on verifying the essential guarantees have been maintained. And I guess I should probably go over. It's been 6 days now. It's almost been a fucking full week. Oh my god. Because of work, I've been fucking slacking. I've been slacking. It has almost been a full week. Most of this, I think the past few sections have really been trying to go over the fact-value distinction. I think the section before the last one was sorry, I don't want to cough into the mic. I kind of did a little bit, but I wanted to stop that as quickly as possible. I think the section before this, the section before the last one, I mean, was going over the issues with the fact value distinction, and then this one has been kind of going over, well, we do need something to replace this thing, because we do because what the fact value distinction was doing was it was trying to ensure something that we do want to ensure. We want to ensure that there is good science, and I'm going to say good politics is how I'm going to phrase it. And we still need a way to determine this, but this way will be different. And instead of going with a fact value distinction, as he did, this is what he did. It's the first house taking into account second house, arranging in rank in order. Sorry, arranging in rank order. And that's kind of how he sets it up. And as you can see, it kind of does away with the fact value distinction. It's not like a thing. There's only taking into account and arranging in rank order. Yeah. Yeah. And now we're going to go over verifying that the essential guarantees have been maintained, because he talked about the guarantees that we need. I'm going to go over that real quick. We will go over them. Where are they? I think they were in this last section. Where are the guarantees? I think they were in a graph. Maybe this was it. I think these were actually the guarantees. So, for the power to take into account, the first requirement, formally contained in the notion of fact, you shall not simplify the number of propositions to be taken into account in the discussion. And this is perplexity. Second requirement, formally contained in the notion of value, you shall make sure that the number of voices that participate in the articulation of propositions is not arbitrarily short-circuited. And this is consultation. And then for the power to arrange in ranked order, the question of can we live together? The third requirement is formally in the notion of value, you shall discuss the compatibility of new propositions with those which are already instituted in such a way as to maintain them all in the same common world that will give them their legitimate place. And this is hierarchization. And then the fourth requirement, formally contained in the notion of fact, once the propositions have been instituted, you shall no longer question their legitimate presence at the heart of collective life. And I think that is the key word, legitimate presence. If they end up failing to meet one of these requirements later on, even if they are instituted, they are not legitimate anymore. They stop being legitimate. And so, the way you undo one is to show how they are illegit, how they don't follow the guarantees that we want to maintain. And I think that's the thing. But let us continue. Verifying that the essential guarantees have been maintained. We cannot conclude our effort at untangling and repackaging facts and values without verifying that we have indeed fulfilled the set of specifications to which we committed ourselves in the first section. I said, in effect, that the fact-value distinction, apart from its role as short circuit, which we are obviously not going to maintain, against which we, on the contrary, we're going to have to learn to struggle, also accomplish several other tasks that are mixed in together for contingent reasons. Let us recall box 3.3, where we agreed to accept on our own account, while abandoning the notion of fact and that of value and the distinction between the two. We have definitely fulfilled the first clause. We've definitely fulfilled the first clause. The work of fabrications of facts is no longer reduced to its last stage, now that we are allowing the articulation of propositions in the successive states of their natural history to emerge from the appearance of candidates entities to their incorporations into the states of the world. I forget what the first clause is. I'm going to go back. This is... Wait. Box 3.3. Is box 3.3? This is box 3.3. The notion that places that a fact has to include the successive stages of fabrication. And so continuing, we have definitely fulfilled the first clause. The work of fabrications of facts is no longer reduced to its last stage, not that we are allowing the articulations of propositions in the successive states of their natural history to emerge. From the appearance of candidate entities to their incorporation into the states of the world, instead of defining the facts by the suspension of all controversy, all uncertainty, all discussion, now define them on the contrary with the quality of a procedure that involves any new entity in a series of successive arenas. It is useless to repress, hide, or play down the importance of controversies, the mediation of instruments, the cost of knowledge, and the clamor of disputes. We have installed controversies at the heart of collective activity, without worrying about whether they are nourished by the usual uncertainty of research or by the debates proper to representative assemblies. And then that is 23. Let's see if I remember the page number. 267. That should be, I typed 167. 267. No. Is it, are we on 269 then? Nope, we're on 23. This is the way of doing justice to Hermit's requirements in order to produce a theory of decision-making in a situation of uncertainty, and to accept all the consequences of the principle of precaution. Did I read this already? Why do I feel like I read this already? Hold on, I'm going to check something. We might be farther along than I thought, because I feel like I remember that, but I might just be wrong. Sorry for this little detour, but I just want to make sure that we're not covering the stuff I've already covered. Oh, I know why. Because I did partially cover it, but then I stopped. That's what it was. And so we are on 117. When new entities are involved, there is always lively discussion. We are no longer, as we are no longer in a hurry to crush under the little word fact the countless configurations under which the new entities participate in collective life. We shall have all the space we need for them to unfold at leisure. I do not claim that this exercise will be easy, but simply that we shall be able to fulfill this item in the specifications set. I also believe that we can fulfill the second clause fairly readily. The notion of fact, let us recall, at the disadvantage of not taking into account the enormous work of shaping, formatting, ordering, and deducing, beginning to give the data a meaning that they never have on their own. Tradition in the philosophy of sciences gives this work the name theory, a lovely euphemism that has come straight down from the heaven of ideas to illuminate the cave. The word we have chosen, that of institution, as to much more justice to the whole set of mechanisms for attributing shape and distributing causalities through which a new entity becomes a legitimate and recognized member of public life. Theory, in contrast, limits too severely the number of agents responsible for the regrouping and stabilization of facts. And then we go back to 267 or 268 for 24. A number of recent writings constitute a veritable anthropology of formalism that is profoundly modifying the theoretical description of theory work. See in particular Pickering 1995, Kenzie 96, Galison 97, and Rosenthal 2000. And we are still on 117. Right? No. Here we are. Instruments, bodies, laws, habits, language, forms of life, calculations, models, metrology. Everything can contribute to the progressive socialization and naturalization of entities, without any need to distinguish in this list between what might belong to the old universe of the sciences and what seems to depend on the old domain of the political. Thus, we believe we are capable of doing justice to the work of shaping and stabilizing. All the more so, as we saw in Chapter 1, we have abandoned the notion of social representation that made it impossible earlier to give a positive meaning to the term institution, the notion of articulation, to give a positive meaning to the term institution. The notion of articulation allows us to connect the quality of reality to the quantity of work supplied. We do not have the pluriverse on one side and the ideas humans hold about it on the other. When an entity becomes a state of the world, it doesn't happen in appearance in spite of the institutions that support it, but for real and thanks to the institutions. The solution, impossible before the development of the sociology of sciences and political ecology, has become the key to our effort of elucidation. We are thus going to be able to bring back into the collective all the variations in degree in the production and progressive difficulty of certainty that the fact-value distinction managed only to crush into a single opposition between knowledge and ignorance. In 268 again for 25. Contaminated blood scandal, as well as all the debates over the acceptance of genetically modified organism, makes it possible to grasp the intermediate stages between local uncertainty and global uncertainty. On this notion of relative existence, see Latour 1999b, Chapter 5. It is probably Pandora's Hope. 119 or 119? No. Or 118. We have already explained our position on the third clause since we proposed a shift in normative requirement. Okay, so this was the second clause. Where did it start? Yeah, okay. The second clause is the notion that replaces that a fact has to include the role of shaping responsible for its stabilization. And then the third one, which you're about to go over, the notion that replaces that of value has to allow the triage of propositions while paying close attention to the facts in detail rather than turning the attention to foundations or forms. We have already explained our position on the third clause since we propose to shift the normative requirement from foundations to the details of the deployment of matters of concern. Still, as proof will not be provided before the next chapter, let me leave this point aside for the moment. Let us simply prepare ourselves to modify the role of the moralist as much as that of the scientist, the politician, the administrator, or the citizen. Let us now turn to the fourth clause. The fourth clause is the notion that replaces that value has to guarantee against the cheating that causes value to be disguised as facts and facts to be disguised as values. Yeah, this was the example of scientific racism and Lysenkoism. The only justification for the fact-value distinction was to prevent the double smuggling through which unscrupulous rascals cause their partisan preferences to be taken for ineluctable states of nature, or, conversely, these purported states of nature to avoid having to explain clearly the values to which they wanted people to cling. By abandoning the fact-value distinction, we committed ourselves to do at least as well as it had done, placing ourselves in the same situation as the European Union, for which the abandonment of national frontiers must not have the effect of reducing territorial security. As we see at a glance from Figure 3.1, we have had very little trouble doing better. No one can accuse us of diminishing the discussion or short-circuiting quality control. On the contrary, laid end to end, the four imperatives require that we not bring it into perplexity too abruptly, that we not unduly accelerate the consultation, that we not forget to look for compatibility with established propositions. And finally, that we not register news to the world without an explicit motivation. It is true that at this stage, not having sufficiently retooled the job description of the scientist, the politician, the administrator, and the economist, I still cannot show that the virtue of a trajectory of exploration will make it possible to do much better than the difference between science and ideology. Leaders will have to wait for me, then, on this crucial point, and they'll be right to be suspicious until I've shown in the following chapter the guarantees I offer are better than those I'm asking readers to abandon. The fifth item, the set of specifications, is easier to fill, but more difficult to prove. And the fifth one is the notion that replaces the fact-value distinction as to protect the autonomy of the sciences and the purity of morality. If by the defense of the autonomy of sciences and the purity of morality we mean two spheres protected against all interference, it goes without saying that we are incapable of satisfying that condition. Such is precisely the misunderstanding that gave rise to the science wars. Let's make common sense accustomed to what should have always been obvious. The more we interfere with the production of facts, the more objective they become. The more the normative requirements gets mixed up with matters of concern, the more it will gain in quality of judgment. Still, I can guarantee that there are indeed two powers that must definitely not be mixed. The power to take into account the number of entities and voices on the one hand, and the will of these entities and voices to form a common world on the other hand. Something essential to be lost if the work of taking into account were shortened, trampled on, or encroached upon by the work of putting in order. We're gonna fucking do this. We're gonna power to take into account. I think I did purple. No, we're gonna redo it. I didn't do it right. I did like magenta basically. We're actually just gonna delete. I'm actually just gonna fucking delete everything. Delete. And now we're gonna do it. Do that. And if the work of putting in order were begun anew, interrupted, or called back into question with the work of taking into account, something essential will be lost if the work of taking into account were shortened, trampled on, and or encroached by the work of putting in order. Also, I just realized I need to this actually. The powers to take into account the number of entities and voices on the one hand, the will of these entities and voices to form a common world on the other hand. Something essential would be lost if the work of taking into account were shortened, trampled on, or encroached upon by the work of putting in order. The work of putting in order will be begun anew, interrupted, or called back into question by the work of taking into account. Behind the clause from the set of specifications that is impossible to carry out, the requirement to defend the autonomy of science and the purity of morality, there is thus an essential function to be conserved, but one that we have to displace in order to shelter it elsewhere. Far from resembling the impossible search for purity, it makes us think rather of the shuttle required by this new bicameralism between the two houses that must at once counterbalance each other and coordinate with each other without getting mixed up in each other's affairs. This task will be the heart of the constitutional work of political ecology. If anyone hesitates to certify your positions on the last of the clauses, it is important to recall the extraordinary confusion in which the unrealizable distinction between facts and values ends up in practice. It will be clear that by passing from one constitution to the other, we are not introducing chaos into a regime that was well ordered up to now. On the contrary, we're bringing just a little bit of logic into a situation of frightful disorder. Sorry. 117, I just realized. The notion that replaces the fact-value distinction has to be able to ensure a quality control at least as good, possible better than, the one that is being abandoned concerning both reduction of facts and production of values. Yeah, okay. Before we are accused of relativism on the pretext that would be calling for a confusion between facts and values, let us recall the incoherence of the old regime, which never managed to achieve this distinction, even though it struggled tirelessly to do so, without wanting to succeed. Moreover, since the real distinction between facts and values would have deprived of any possibility of defining the good common world in its own way and on the sly. In this confusion, everybody loses. The, the scientists, who are sometimes asked to be absolutely certain, sometimes to plunge into controversies, but without being given the legitimate means to move from perplexity to hierarchy. The moralist, who is asked to arrange entities in order of importance, but who is deprived of any precise knowledge of these entities and of all the work of consultation. The politician, who has to decide, he is told, but who is not given access to the research front and thus has to decide in the dark. He said that he has the people with him. Ah, but how many crimes have been committed in the name of the people? Like the ancient chorus, the people is supposed to punctuate with its low voice, its lamentations, its wide proverbs, the agitations of those who claim to be consulting, educating, representing, conducting, measuring, satisfying. The public is consulted nonetheless. It is in the derisory form of public participation in decision making. The public has to know it is in the mode of informing, divulging, popularizing, vulgarizing. The public is not asked to go into the laboratory and become perplexed in its turn. Also, sorry, I need to do this. We need to go to 26. The critique of expertise and its limits is compatibly analyzed in Jasanoff 1995, Zaraznowski, et al. 1996, and Irwin and Wynn 96, and soundly deconstructed in Calonne, Muscooms et al. 2001. All these studies extend to which the old pedagogical conception of the relation between experts and the public is now updated. All these studies stress the extent to which the old pedagogical conception of the relation between experts and the public is now outdated. We go back to 1, and I'm just going to do this. The public is not asked to go into the laboratory and become perplexed in turn. If it is told about institutions, the purpose is to lock it up in the prisons of its own social representations, the better to subjugate it with the chains of naturalization and the ineluctable laws that are going to shut its mouth. If anyone offers to hierarchize its values, be deprived of all access to the details of the facts, till the living fire of controversy, till the uncertainty of the collective. No, there is no question about it. Every unprejudiced mind that casts a glance upon this profound confusion that is called society's debates over science and technology can only conclude if I have. It must be possible to do a bit better than this. Provided, nevertheless, that to the four requirements we have just developed, a dynamic is added that allows them to be better understood. Yeah. And now we're on to a new exterior. More than this one ridiculous chapter would be needed, as I am well aware, to bring about the abandonment of the venerable distinction between facts and values. Indeed, if people are so fond of the distinction, which is as awkward as it is actual, it is because it seems at least to guarantee a certain transcendence over the redoubtable imminence of public life. And that goes to footnote 27. So that is on page 269 now. These ideas of transcendence and immanence all come, obviously, from the myth of the cave, from the weakened conception of the social. They must nevertheless be taken seriously, as long as we have to not resort to the collective, its own proper form of immanence, which Plato mockingly but actually calls autophoesis and gorgias. On this point, see Latour 1999b, chapter 7 and 8. I don't know what autophoesis means. Autophoesis. Plato. Okay, I'm very confused. I can't find this. Wait, I need to message something. I need to message someone real quick. Because this is like an actual issue, because I do want to know. Sorry for this little detour. But I would really like to know what autophoesis, if that's the right thing, because oh, no, not phimosis. Auto Boas. Boss. I'm so confused. Sorry, I do actually. No, not AI. Yes, Plato. I can't find it. Maybe if I type Ooh. No, all I get is fucking Sisyphus. There's no auto in the thing I have. so confused. If only we had my resident expert, my resident fucking expert in all things great, but we don't. My resident expert isn't actually here, and so it's so fucking sad right now. So fucking sad. Okay, chat, you're going away because I need to know. I need to know about this. I do need to know about this. Sorry, 1 second. I'm typing. I'm just typing so that I get a quicker response if she replies. There. Even in recognizing that it is inapplicable, one would like to preserve it against the supreme danger that would come from doing without it. One could find oneself defenseless before the reduction of all decisions within the narrow limits of the collective, confused with decay. Without the transcendence of nature, which is indifferent to human passions, without the transcendence of moral law, which is indifferent to the objections of reality, without the transcendence of the sovereign, which is always capable of deciding, there is to be no further recourse against the arbitrariness of public life, no court of appeals. If one maintains the distinction between the common world and the common good, against all odds, it will be to hold on to this reserve that is going to make it possible to rise up a nation, either by taking from nature the courage to struggle against opinion, by turning to incontestable values in search of something with which to struggle against the simplest states of nature, or else, finally, by asking the indisputable will of the sovereign to decide against everything and everyone. Does he bring up three? Okay, he does. We're gonna wait then. I shall succeed in restoring the confidence of my readers to private the distinction between facts and values only if I can make them see for themselves at the end of this chapter that for political ecology there is another transcendence, another externality, which owes nothing either to nature or to moral principles or to the arbitrariness of the sovereign. And we are going to do that. We're going to make it purple. Purple. It's purple, guys. Well, it's like it's like magenta. It's not actually like purple. It's like magenta. Magenta's kind of like purple, I guess. It's like not really. It's not really. So, and then footnote 28. I've rarely given a lecture on science studies without having some encounter with the Lysenko affair, about 3 minutes later with the objection of the Nazis' Jewish science. The order may change, but the time lapse remains more or less stable. Those who might still have doubts about the morality of the bicameralism defined here try to put it to the test with these two obligatory tortures of the epistemology police. The Lysenko affair does not attest to the invasion of genetic science by political ideology, but on the contrary, to invasion of politics by science. In the case in point, the scientific laws of history and economics. With red totalitarianism, the two short circuits of science and violence, right and might, reinforce one another to produce at one and the same time very poor politics. Neither potato growers nor geneticists were consulted, and very poor science. The people involved managed neither to follow the influence of the genes nor to document the importance of the climate and modes of cultivation. How many sections does it take to understand that the scientific ambitions of the Nazis did not respond to any of the requirements of perplexity, constitution, publicity, or closure. Suppressed by violence, all the slowing down the procedure of the sciences and of politics in order to produce indisputable laws of history and race in the name of which they could kill in mass with clear conscience is not exactly the goal pursued by science. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true, I think. I think that's true. Although this exteriority doesn't have the grandiose and formidable aspect of the courts of appeal to which the old constitution had entrusted the task of saving public life. It has the great advantage of being easy to find, provided that we agree to extend the work of the collective a bit. I maintain that I am replacing the difference between the common world and the common good, the simple difference between stopping and continuing the movement of the progressive composition of the common world, according to the definition given for politics. Let us take a look at figure 3.2. And let us. So we have appellant entities, collective entities are appellant entities, externalized entities. And I don't know what appellant means, but just look it up. Appellant. A person who applies to a higher court for reversal of the decision of the lower court. Okay. The preceding section did not trace the dynamics of the entire collective, but only one cycle of its slow progression, its plainful exploration. What I did was like explaining the successive phases of combustion engine. We still have to get to the end. We still have to get the engine started. Every new proposition first goes through the four compartments of this figure, responding in turn to each of our essential requirements. It induces perplexity in those who are gathered to discuss it, and who set up the trials that allow them to ensure the seriousness of its candidate for existence. Demands to be taken into account by all those whose habits it is going to modify. We must therefore sit on its shirt. If it is successful in the first two stages, it will be able to insert itself in the states of the world only provided it finds a place in a hierarchy that precedes it. Finally, it owns the legitimate right to existence within an institution that is in essence and will become part of the indisputable nature of the good common world. Such are the various phases of one cycle. And before we continue, I actually think I probably should just do all that. And this is the first cycle. But the movement of the composition cannot stop there because the collective still has an outside. If the old constitution required a constant classification of the provisional results of history in the two opposite compartments of ontology or politics, the same is not true of the new constitution. The distinction between facts and values didn't allow change to be registered. As a matter of fact, by definition, were always there, already there. If there was actually a history of their discovery by humans, there was no historicity proper to non-humans. And then we go back to 269. I've been working stubbornly for 25 years to the advantage of this tiny problem. How is it that people can so easily accept the history of scientists, but have so much difficulty granting a somewhat serious dose of historicity to things these scientists have discovered? By separating the history of the scientists from ontology too quickly, people have prevented themselves from taking advantage of this very interesting anomaly. And back to 123, I think it is. Although the composition of the actors of the pluriverse did not stop changing, the old constitution registered the continuous variation in the positions only as a succession of surreptitious revolutions in the composition of the common world. Nature changed metaphysics without anyone's ever understanding what sleight of hand brought this about, since it was supposed to remain, as the name indicates, anterior to any metaphysics. Uh, Posterior, anterior means before, I think. Is it anterior is before? I'm pretty sure. Anterior. Nearer the front, coming before in time earlier, yes. Posterior after, anterior earlier. Same is not true of the new Constitution, which has precisely the goal of following in detail the intermediary degrees between what is and what ought to be, registering all the successive stages of what I have called an experimental metaphysics. The old system allowed shortcuts and acceleration, but did not understand dynamics, whereas ours, which aimed at slowing things down and fosters a great respect for procedures, does allow understanding of movement in a process. I'm gonna I'm trying to get better at highlighting, and I feel like that should be highlighted. Let us recall that the collective does not yet know according to what criteria it is to articulate its propositions. It only knows, such as our hypothesis, that the propositions cannot be arranged in two sets constituted without due process. At any given moment, let us call it T0, we find it completing its first cycle by instituting a certain number of essences. Very well, but that it also means that it has to eliminate other propositions, being unable to make room for them in the collective. Let us recall that we no longer have at our disposal the premature totalization of nature we could use as a Supreme Court of appeal. Of those excluded entities, we cannot yet say anything except that they are exteriorized or externalized. An explicit collective decision has been made not to take them into account. They are to be viewed as insignificant. This is the case in the example given earlier, the 8,000 people who die each year from automobile accidents in France. No way was found to keep them as full-fledged and thus living members of the collective. Where did I stop? It was the collective. In the hierarchy that was set up, the speed of automobiles and the flood of alcohol was preferred to highway deaths. Even if this may appear shocking at first glance, no moral principle is superior to the procedure of progressive composition of the common world. For the time being, the rapid use of cars is worth much more in France than 8,000 lives per year. About this choice, there was nothing we can say yet. In contrast, a gradient is going to be established between the interior of the collective and its exterior, which will gradually fill up with excluded entities, beings that the collectivity has to decide to do without, for which it has refused to take responsibility. Let us remember that these entities can be humans, but also animal species, research programs, concepts, any of the rejected propositions that at one moment or another are co-signed to the dumping ground of a given collective. We no longer have society surrounded by a nature, but a collective producing a clear distinction between what it has externalized and what it has internalized and what it has externalized. I'm actually going to do a few things. We're going to do that. And I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it for this. Still, nothing proves that these externalized entities will always remain outside the collective. They no longer have to play as they did in the old scenography of facts and values. the obtuse role of a thing in itself, of stupid matters of fact, nor the role as vague as it is estimable of transcendent moral values, of transcendent moral principles. Sorry, I was like, I read that wrong, didn't I? How did I read this wrong? So what are the entities that have been set aside going to do? They're going to put the collective in danger, lest rather that the power to take into account is sensitive and alert enough. It is excluded by the power to put in order, T0, and come back to haunt the power to take into account at T+1. I shall return to this dynamic in Chapter 5. Such is the feedback loop of the expanding collective. It makes it so very different from a society endowed with its representations in the midst of an inert nature made up of essences whose lists would be fixed once and for all, expecting from moral values a salvation from on high, pictured mere matters of fact. All the transcendence one needs in practice to escape from the straitjacket of immanence is found there on the outside, in reach. We have to go to T30. Sorry, we have to go to footnote 30. And we're also going to footnote at T+1. We're going to do that. So we go back to 269. We're at 25. Oh, we're down. Not to be confused, despite the cybernetic metaphor, the numerous effort by sociologists to short-circuit politics with a biologized or nationalized theory of the social world, as for example with Luhmann, 1989. The vocabulary we are seeking remains properly political here, not biological. And I think it was 30, right? It was 30? It was 30. Oh, feedback loop. Yeah, feedback loop is a biological thing. The new constitution, what has been externalized, can appeal and come back to knock at the door of the collective to demand that it be taken into account. The price, of course, of modifications in the list of entities present, negotiations, and a new definition of the outside. The outside is no longer fixed, no longer inert. It is no longer either a reserve or a court of appeal or a dumping ground, but is what has constituted the object of an explicit procedure of externalization. I'm going to do that, and then I'm also going to take a look at this again. This allows us to make clear the difference encountered in Chapter 1 between modernist objects and non-modern or risky objects. Asbestos, which we took as our example, is characterized by the extreme slowness with which the excluded entities return to compel reconsideration the definition of this perfect insulating material. In France, it took some 30 years for lung diseases to become an integral part of the definition of this inert material. Its miracle product for the presence of all those patients, upon their return to the finally perplexed collective, to require the demolitions of thousands of square meters of offices and schools. A risky civilized attachment would have taken less time to move from the outside to the inside. Chapter 4, note 46. Those the power to put in order had just excluded would have put the power to take into account on alert right away. It is through this feature that I shall define civilization later on, and it is that which will allow us to take full advantage of the principle of precaution. Edwald 2000. N1. I almost just said Edwald 2000. And this is where we ended. In considering the succession of stages, we understand why the factual distinction could not be of any use to us, and why we were right to abandon it at the price of a perhaps painful effort. All our requirements have the form of an imperative. In other words, they all involve the question of what ought to be done. It is impossible to begin to ask the moral question after the states of the world have been defined. Question of what ought to be, as we can see now, is not a moment in the process. Rather, it's coextensive with the entire process. It's the imposture there would be in seeking to limit oneself to one stage or another. Symmetrically, the famous question of the definition of facts is not reduced to just one or two stages, but is distributed throughout all the stages. Perplexity counts as much for this question as the relevance of those who are brought in to judge it, as the compatibility of the new elements with the old, to end up with the act of installation that provisionally finishes, giving it an essence with clear boundaries. With the awkwardness that consisted in reducing the definition of facts to just one stage of the process. Also, I think we fucking did it. I hate you all. Fucking hate you all. And by hate you all, I mean I hate the server I'm in. Because it didn't give me, because it made me think that Pippa responded to me, and she didn't yet. If one wishes to, at all costs, to maintain the distinction between what is and what ought to be, we could say that it is a matter of traversing the whole set of stages twice by asking two distinct questions of the same propositions, subject to each of the full requirements. What discussion must be followed? What is the provisional result of the discussion? Behind the false distinction between facts and values was hidden an essential question about the quality of the procedure to be followed and about the outline of its trajectory. A question now liberated from the confusion, from the confused quarrel that in air quotes, political epistemology sustain with ethics. I'm actually gonna do this. And then we're on to 32. So that's 270. We shall have to return to this crucial feature in detail in Chapter 5. We approach the notion of collective experience, the very particular type of normativity that will allow us to describe its course. I shall in fact use it to define a third power that could be called power to follow up, not to imagining, to use humble terms, appropriate to industry, sort of quality control on the traceability of the procedure. You're on 126. Readers will probably notice that I've replaced the fact value distinction with another one that is no less clear cut, no less absolute, which cuts across the other and is in a way superior to it. I'm not speaking of the shuttle between taking into account and putting in order, but a much more profound difference between, on the one hand, the short circuit of the composition of the common world, and on the other, the slowing down that is made possible by due process, which I've chosen to call representation. I have nothing in principle against dichotomies. On the contrary, I don't hesitate to make this profound contrast between acceleration and representation play a central normative role. This is the source from which we are going to draw our indignation and our legal and moral standing. Represent rather than short circuit. Such is the goal of political ecology. As I see it, there is a reserved morality here that is much more inexhaustible and much more discriminating than the vain indignation whose goal was to spread the contaminations of values by facts or of facts by values. Do that. At the beginning of this chapter, I was looking for a way to obtain the reality, the externality, and the unity of nature through due process. At the end of this chapter, we know at least that we are not confronting an impossible task. We simply have to modify our definition of externality, because the social world does not have the same environment at all as the collective. The former is definitive and made up of a radically distinct material. The second is provisional and produced by an explicit procedure of exteriorization. we are going to, before I continue, I'm actually just going to fucking, I'm going to go back to this anyway. When a member of the old Constitution looked outside, she was looking upon a nature made up of objects indifferent to her passions, to which she had to submit or from which she had to tear herself away. When we look outside, we see a whole still to be composed, made up of excluded entities, humans and non-humans, in whom we have explicitly decided not to be interested, and of appellants, humans and non-humans, who demand more or less noisily to be part of our republic. There is nothing left of the old metaphysics of nature, nothing left of the old allegory of the cave. Although everything that matters to public life remains reality, the non-humans in their cohorts, externality produced according to the rules and no longer surreptitiously, unity, the progressive unity of the collective in the process of exploration, to which it suffices to add the procedures for discussion we must now make explicit. And then we're gonna do this. And for the final paragraph, where does external nature now lie? It is right here, carefully naturalized, that is, socialized right inside the expanding collective. It is time to house it finally in a civil way by building it a definitive dwelling place and offering it not the simple slogan of the earlier democracies, no taxation without representation, but a riskier and more ambitious maxim, no reality without representation. That is the end of this fucking chapter. That was actually really good. I think I might, for Sirius's issues, someone named Sirius was worried about something, and I think this will solve all of his issues. All of their issues. It will solve all of their issues, I think. I'm just going through this, and if they have any questions for me, I can probably answer them. But this answered kind of a very important thing for Sirius. And what was that question? It was if Bruno Latour is talking about things in this way, if they're just kind of like actors and stuff like that, and like entities and stuff like that, then how do we determine what's good and bad entities? And when we have when we have entities we don't like, how do we kick them out? And I think this answered all of that fairly well. I don't know if there's much to explain without just me like reiterating what the point was of this, which I would just do in like the beginning of the next section anyway. So yeah. Well, that will be all for right now. I know I said I'd do more, but I'm a little bit out of it right now. I'm gonna go lay down. But I'll be streaming later, the next section, because I need to, because I should. It'd be good. I hope you all like this. If you want, you can donate to support me. But yeah. See you all later.